This video is a fictional cosmic horror broadcast inspired by real space science, Marsquake research, seismic sonification, and deep space communication systems. It is not a real emergency broadcast, not an official NASA or space agency recording, and not evidence of alien life. Real scientific ideas are used as inspiration for a fictional story.
The Marsquake that tried to help us. A fictional cosmic horror broadcast, inspired by real space science. This is Relay 12, archival playback at 32 times speed. What you are hearing is not a microphone on Mars. It is not wind. It is not a voice. It is a Marsquake converted into audio. It should not contain language. It should not contain tomorrow's timestamp. And it should not have printed my next sentence before I spoke it. The sentence was, "Humans don't know how to live." This recording is fictionalized for preservation as an incident-style account. It is not an official space agency transmission. It is not a real emergency broadcast. My name is Elias Vale. I am the Night Systems Monitor for Asterion Relay 12, a private deep signal archive station in the high desert. At 0258 UTC, I opened a copy of a Mars seismic file for routine playback verification. At 0311 UTC, the file opened me back. I am making this incident log because the station recorder is still running, even though I have shut down playback twice. I have disconnected the local monitoring speaker. I have disabled the sonification module. I have pulled the left channel from the rack. And still, every 12 minutes and 22 seconds, the recorder writes a new line into the transcript. Not audio, not speech. A line, the same line, with a timestamp that has not happened yet. I am going to begin at the point before this looked impossible, because that is the only way this will make sense to anyone reviewing the file. If this file is recovered by public archive staff, do not replay the seismic audio at 32 times speed. Do not run speech cadence matching. Do not attempt to correct the timestamp drift. And if the phrase appears in your transcript before I say it here, stop listening. Relay 12 is not a spacecraft facility. We do not command probes. We do not operate landers. We are not a government station. And nothing in this room is classified. Most nights, we are less dramatic than a weather office. The work is maintenance, redundancy, archive repair, format conversion, old radio astronomy sessions, public spacecraft data mirrors, educational copies of mission telemetry, signal preservation for universities that do not want to lose fragile formats every time storage standards change. Our station keeps cold backups of things people assume are already safe because they exist online. They are not safe. Nothing digital is safe forever. That is why I was here. The Mars archive drive had been throwing checksum warnings for 3 days. Not failure warnings, not corruption exactly. Just inconsistencies between two copies that should have been identical. Most of the affected files were harmless. Images, spectral tables, housekeeping packets, and one folder marked Mars Seisis/public copy MQ1222A sonification test set. That label is ours. It is not an agency catalog number. It was assigned when the station ingested a public Mars seismic dataset for a university project on planetary acoustics. The project ended years ago. The folder stayed. That is common here. Data outlives purpose. Inside the folder were 3 things: a raw seismic time series, a processed waveform, and an audio file generated by speeding the signal up until low-frequency ground motion could be heard by human ears. That process is called sonification. It is real. It does not mean Mars is making sounds in air. It does not mean a microphone heard anything. It means data was transformed into something ears can inspect. A seismometer feels motion. Software turns motion into pressure waves for speakers. That is all. Or that is supposed to be all. The original source event was a large Marsquake-type record. Marsquakes are real. NASA's InSight lander carried a sensitive seismometer to Mars, and detected more than 1,000 seismic events before the mission ended, after dust reduced its power. Mars is not geologically dead in the way people once imagined. It cools. It shifts. It cracks. Sometimes something hits it. Sometimes the crust releases stress. None of that requires intelligence. None of that requires a message. That is the first thing I want clear. At 02:58 UTC, when I opened the file, I believed I was looking at an archive problem. Not a signal. Not an alien artifact. Not a warning. Just a file. The first anomaly was small enough that I nearly deleted it. The sonified waveform had a tremor in the midsection, a repeating cluster. Not regular like a clock. Not random like noise. More like someone tapping a finger while trying to remember a sentence. I saw it before I heard it. On the waterfall display, the energy bands pinched and separated in short bursts. 4 close pulses. A gap. 2 pulses. A longer gap. Then a final pulse that sat slightly below the rest, as if the ground itself had dropped its voice. I am aware of how that sounds. I am aware that words like voice contaminate analysis. So I did what I normally do. I assumed the problem was local. The station speaker is old. The right monitor cone vibrates when the HVAC compressor starts. The room has fluorescent ballast noise in one ceiling strip. The audio interface has a known grounding issue if the backup recorder is charging. I muted the speaker. The pattern remained on the display. I bypassed the audio interface. The pattern remained in the file. I loaded the raw seismic trace before sonification. The pattern was still there, buried in low-frequency motion, too slow to hear, but visible. At first, that made it less strange. If the same shape existed in the raw data, maybe the audio file had not caused it. Maybe it was just part of the quake. Marsquakes have complicated waveforms. They ring, they scatter. Mars's crust can trap energy in ways that look unfamiliar to Earth-trained intuition. I told myself that. I wrote it in the first incident note. 03:04:12 UTC. Repeating interval cluster visible in raw and processed channels. Likely natural resonance or processing artifact. No further action. That note now appears in the transcript at 02:51:50 UTC, 12 minutes and 22 seconds before I wrote it. The light time to Mars changes depending on where Earth and Mars are in their orbits. Sometimes a signal takes only a few minutes one way, sometimes more than 20. At the geometry listed in the old project notes, the calculated one-way delay was 12 minutes and 22.4 seconds. That number appears too often in what follows. I do not believe in magic numbers. I do believe in coincidences, but I do not believe in coincidences that learn new tasks. At 03:07 UTC, I ran the first integrity check. The raw file matched its stored checksum. The processed file matched. The sonified audio did not. That should have been the explanation. Corrupted audio. End of incident. Except the mismatch was not in the waveform. It was in the metadata. The audio samples were identical to the stored preservation copy. The file header was not. The header contained a new field that should not have existed. Transcript link, pending. No transcript had been generated. No speech-to-text service was active. There was no reason for an old Marsquake audio file to expect a transcript. I checked the station automation queue. Empty. I checked local microphone input. Muted. I checked the backup recorder. Passive. I checked the external network. Disconnected for night maintenance. At 03:10 UTC, I wrote, possible metadata contamination from batch captioning tool. Quarantine file. Rebuild header from preservation copy. The station printed that note twice. Once at 03:10, once at 02:57:38. Again, 12 minutes and 22 seconds apart. I did not notice the earlier copy immediately. That matters. For several minutes I was still inside the ordinary world. I still believed I could identify the bad process, isolate the corrupted file, rebuild the audio, and leave a tidy explanation for morning staff. I need whoever hears this to understand that the fear did not arrive first. The fear arrived late. What arrived first was irritation, then curiosity, then the careful professional embarrassment of realizing your simple explanation does not survive contact with the evidence. At 0313 UTC, I loaded the audio into the spectrogram. The phrase was not audible. Not then. What I heard was a dry, dusty stutter, a rhythm, like pebbles falling down a metal chute. But the spectrogram showed repeated gaps at human speech spacing. I am not saying it showed words. It showed timing. Speech is not only sound. Speech is pattern. Breath lengths, pauses, syllabic weight, the tiny unevenness of intent. The waveform had that unevenness. Natural processes can mimic pattern. We are pattern-seeking animals. We hear voices in fans, music in engines, names in static. So I ran comparison tests designed to disprove what I thought I was seeing. I compared the interval clusters to station noise. No match. I compared them to the compressor cycle. No match. I compared them to the hard drive read cadence. No match. I compared them to common English speech rhythm templates, not for words, only for timing. That was when the software labeled the cluster, not with a transcript, with a confidence warning. Cadence match, human language like, confidence, LOBU, recommended action, do not transcribe from seismic source. That last line was not part of the software. I know because I wrote the software note library. There is no do not transcribe from seismic source warning in it. There should be. There is now. At 0316 UTC, I changed the playback rate. At 16 times speed, the cluster was too slow. A bump, then another, then a long sagging vibration. At 24, the pattern started to breathe. At 32, it became almost verbal. At 48, it flattened into noise. 32 was the lock. Do not treat that as instruction. That is just what happened. I am saying it because if I do not say it, the transcript will say it for me. I played only 6 seconds. In those 6 seconds, I heard something my mind wanted to assemble into speech. Not clear speech, not a voice. More like the space around a voice. The absence that tells you where a mouth should be. I replayed it once. Then I stopped. The transcript window updated. Humans don't know how to live. No apostrophe. No punctuation. No speaker label. Just the phrase. I stared at that line for a long time. Long enough for the station recorder to flag a silence gap. I remember the exact thought that came first, and I am ashamed of it now because it was so small. I thought, that is a good sentence. Not a good message. Not a comforting one. A good sentence. Compact. Judgmental. Viral. The kind of phrase people would clip, repost, argue over, turn into thumbnails. That was my first human response to a possibly impossible message from another planet. I thought about audience retention. Maybe that is what it meant. Maybe that is why it said we do not know how to live. I deleted the transcript line. It came back. Not immediately. 12 minutes and 22 seconds later. At 03:28:34 UTC. Same line. New timestamp. The next sensible explanation was contamination, not alien contamination. Human contamination. Someone had used the Marsquake audio in a video, maybe with captions. Someone had embedded a lyric, a prank subtitle, a teaching note. The transcript tool had found cached text from an old project. I searched the project directory. No caption files. No subtitles. No text documents except the university README. The README was plain. Mars seismic sonification exercise. Playback rates. Frequency scaling. Basic warnings about not interpreting sonified data as literal sound from Mars. Good warnings. Warnings people ignore. I searched the entire local storage array for the phrase. No results. Then one result. The active transcript. Then two. The active transcript. And a temporary file inside the quarantine folder. The temporary file creation time was A3:16:12. That was 1 second after I first played the 32 times audio. Reasonable. But the file modified time was 03:03:50. Not reasonable. I checked the station clock. Stable. I checked NTP history. No jump. I checked the backup GPS clock. Locked. I checked the internal time server. No drift beyond 3 milliseconds. That was the first moment my hands went cold. Not because of aliens, because of order. The world has many terrible things in it, but time is the thing that keeps them arranged. When timestamps begin to disagree without permission, the room changes shape. Not physically, procedurally. You stop trusting sequence. You stop trusting cause. You stop trusting the mercy of before and after. I opened the cold mirror. The mirror is a write-once preservation store. It is not impossible to alter, but it is inconvenient enough that accidental alteration is rare. The Marsquake file in the mirror had never been opened by the current operating system. Its access date still showed the year it was ingested. I copied it to a clean sandbox. Generated a new sonification. 32 times speed. Same cluster. I did not run speech matching. The transcript window updated anyway. Humans don't know how to live. This time the line arrived with a prefix. Source. Local. That made no sense. The source was the Mars file. The transcript was local. The phrase was not. I need to explain something about our station recorders. Relay 12 maintains 3 independent logs during night operations. The incident recorder, which captures my voice and screen events. The system journal, which captures process-level activity. And the environmental recorder, which tracks room tone, power fluctuations, temperature, door state, and rack vibration. The environmental recorder is not smart. It does not transcribe. It does not know words. It writes numbers. At 03:32 UTC, its vibration channel began marking the same interval cluster as an event. Not from the speaker. The speaker was off. Not from the racks. I checked the accelerometer feed. The pulses were too weak to feel, but they were present in the desk, in the floor, in the metal casing of the recorder. I placed my palm flat beside the keyboard. Nothing. No tremor. No shaking. Just a screen insisting the room was repeating Mars. I said aloud, for my own record, "This is probably a software loop." The transcript displayed, "This is probably a software loop." That should not have frightened me. Speech to text can transcribe a live microphone, except my microphone channel was disabled. I had disabled it after the first transcript line. The incident recorder had my voice because it records from a hardware path downstream of the booth mic. The transcript tool should not have had that feed. I checked the transcript timestamp. It appeared at 03:20:03. I said the sentence at 03:32:25. 12 minutes and 22 seconds. I stopped speaking for 5 minutes. That was the first thing I did that felt like fear. I sat in the room with the racks humming and the Mars file open on the screen, and I tried to create no new information, no voice, no typing, no mouse clicks, no notes. I watched the waterfall display. The cluster continued. Every 12 minutes and 22 seconds, it wrote a small new shape into the output buffer. Not louder, not clearer, just more certain. Silence did not stop it. Silence gave it space. At 0338 UTC, the transcript updated again. Humans don't know how to live above. Above. That was new. The word did not come from me. I had not said it. I had not typed it. I had not thought it clearly until I saw it. Above. I looked at the Mars visualizer still open in the left pane, a rotating globe, red and brown, with the event location plotted as a pale ring. Mars has no surface life we know of. Mars, if it ever had life, lost the easy version. Liquid water withdrew. Atmosphere thinned. Radiation reached down. The surface became a bad place to be complicated. If anything persisted, the safer direction would be below. Under dust. Under rock. Under time. Humans do not know how to live above. That could be a statement about Mars. Or about us. We build upward. We light cities. We broadcast. We heat the night side of our planet until instruments can see us. We fill orbit with reflective machines. We send greetings into dark places because we mistake silence for loneliness. Maybe something was not saying we lacked wisdom. Maybe it was saying our survival strategy was loud. At 0341 UTC, I ran a correlation test I now regret. I compared the interval clusters in the Marsquake file against the station's historical receiver windows. A receiver window is when we point, listen, and correct for expected signal delay. The pattern strength rose during windows, not transmission windows. Listening windows. When Earth was pointed at Mars and waiting, the Marsquake did not behave like a message being sent to us. It behaved like a shape forming when we listened. There is a difference. A sent message exists whether you receive it or not. This looked more like frost forming on a cold surface. The condition creates the pattern. The receiver is not passive. The receiver is part of the event. I checked old logs, different years, different software, different antennas, other archived Mars seismic sonifications. Most were clean. A few had weak interval clusters. Always during heavy observation periods. Always near files that had been opened repeatedly for human listening demonstrations. Never in raw instrument housekeeping. Never in camera images. Only where motion had been turned into sound. Only where the ground had been invited to resemble a voice. That is not proof of intelligence. It is worse than proof. It is a behavior. Proof ends arguments. Behavior creates new ones. At 0346 UTC, I made a mistake. I decided to create a control phrase. A unique sentence no archive could contain. I re-enabled the booth microphone for exactly one sentence and said, "The blue chair is not listening to the red planet." I chose it because it was absurd, specific, disposable. I waited. The transcript captured it correctly at 0346:19. I thought that proved the live microphone was isolated from the Mars process. Then the seismic pattern window updated. Not the transcript. The spectrogram. The raw Marsquake display placed a new set of markers inside the old file, aligned to a time index from years earlier. The software labeled the cadence similarity at 82%. The matched phrase was, "The blue chair is not listening to the red planet," created at 03:33:57, 12 minutes and 22 seconds before I spoke it. That was when the event became personal. Not because it knew my name. That would have been theatrical. Names are easy. Names are in user accounts, file paths, badges, payroll exports. This was worse. It knew a meaningless sentence before it had meaning. It knew shape before cause. I leaned back from the console. The chair creaked. The environmental recorder marked the creak as a low-confidence interval cluster. I stopped moving. I remember looking at the door, not because I expected anything outside it, because doors are comforting when a threat has direction. This did not. It had timing. At 0350 UTC, I began this spoken incident account. The opening warning you heard was not the first thing I recorded. I inserted it later. Or I thought I did. The transcript claims it was created at 033738. That was before I understood what 32 times playback was doing. Before I said the control phrase. Before the word above appeared. I do not know whether this means the file is predicting me, copying me backward, or forcing me to say what it already contains. Those are different horrors. I have no way to distinguish them. I can only document sequence as I experience it. At 0352 UTC, I shut down the sonification module. The audio stopped. The waveform froze. The transcript did not. It printed, "Help is not speech." Then, "Help is reduction." Then nothing for 12 minutes. Those lines did not sound like aliens. They sounded like labels. Like a machine translation of a manual. Help is not speech. Help is reduction. I need to be careful here. It is tempting, under stress, to make the anomaly human, because human things are easier to fear. A hidden civilization under Mars. A buried transmitter. A warning from ancient survivors. Those ideas are almost comforting. They give the event a sender. A sender can be imagined. Negotiated with. Misunderstood. Forgiven. But the Marsquake pattern did not behave like someone speaking across space. It behaved like a procedure activated by interpretation. Like a seed that only germinates inside listening systems. Not life, maybe. Not machine, maybe. An instruction preserved in physical motion. A shape that uses observers as its playback device. At 0357 UTC, I found the first sign of structure beyond language timing. The interval clusters were grouped into blocks. Each block had a repeated header pulse, then a longer body, then a low-frequency tail. I mapped them as if they were packets. That was another mistake. Once I mapped them as packets, the station software began treating them as packets. The raw file did not change size. The display changed interpretation. Header, body, tail, header, body, tail. Then the transcript window added labels. Step 1. Less light. I closed the window. It reopened in read-only mode. Step 2. Less heat. I disconnected the network cable from the analysis machine. Step 3. Less signal. The screen dimmed by 1 step. I did not touch it. The rack fans dropped in pitch. The room became quieter. Not silent, more attentive. I said, very quietly, "No." The transcript printed the word at 0348 UTC, 12 minutes early. Less light, less heat, less signal. If that is help, then help means concealment. If that is survival, then survival means becoming harder for the universe to notice. That is an old fear in radio astronomy circles, though usually discussed without admitting fear. Should we announce ourselves? Should we transmit? Is silence safer? Most of the time those questions sound philosophical, because the universe appears empty enough to make bravery cheap. But what if the answer is not, there are predators? What if the answer is stranger? What if life that grows loud becomes part of a process it cannot see? What if the danger is not being eaten, but being included? Cataloged, indexed, matched, played back, reduced. I am not claiming that is what the Mars file says. I am saying that is the interpretation the station began building. At 0404 UTC, the Mars globe visualization changed. No image file changed. No external data loaded. The event ring moved below the surface. Not literally, of course. The visualizer is symbolic. It plots coordinates on a model. But the depth field, previously blank, populated with a value, minus 17.2 kilometers, then minus 31 point, then minus 62. Marsquakes can have depth estimates. That is not strange by itself. What was strange was the label. Safe layer, below reception. Below reception. I had never seen that phrase in any geophysical software. Below detection would make sense. Below surface. Below crust. Below noise. Below reception is radio language, or hospitality language. A place where no one receives you. A place where you cannot be welcomed. A place where you cannot be heard. I looked at the station windows then. There are no windows in the relay room, but there is a camera feed from the dish yard. I keep it on a small monitor at night because it is better than staring only at data. The dishes were still. The desert was black. Mars was not visible in the camera view, but I knew where it was, above the western ridge, small and red and ordinary. It is important that it looked ordinary. Cosmic horror is often imagined as a tear in the sky, a vast eye, a shape behind stars. But the worst thing I have seen tonight is a normal planet doing nothing visible at all, just being where it always is, just waiting inside the math. At 0409 UTC, the station power system entered conservation mode without command. Only non-essential lights, reduced fan speed, dimmed screens, the kind of mode we use during wildfire smoke events when grid stability is poor. There was no grid warning. The UPS logs show no trigger. The conservation mode name changed in the system journal. Surface quiet. I forced manual override. The lights brightened. For 3 seconds, the room felt human again. Then the environmental recorder marked the light increase as a transmission event. That is not what light is, technically. But in a broad enough sense, it is true. Light is emission. Heat is emission. Sound is emission. A city is a transmitter. A body is a transmitter. A thought becomes a transmitter when spoken into a machine. The Marsquake pattern was not only interested in radio, it was interested in evidence of presence. At 0413 UTC, the transcript printed, "Help is to remain uncounted." I did not like that line. I still do not. It has the tone of mercy. That is what frightens me. Malice would be simpler. A hostile thing says, "I will harm you." A merciful thing says, "I will save you from what you are." And if it is old enough, large enough, or patient enough, it may not recognize the difference. The phrase, "humans don't know how to live," appeared again at 0416 UTC. This time the spectrogram highlighted the word "live" differently, not as speech, as duration. The pulse corresponding to live was not a syllable. It was a long tail extending under the rest of the waveform. The software measured it as decay, a vibration taking longer than expected to fade. The help protocol, if that is what it was, treated living as persistence after disturbance, not happiness, not memory, not reproduction, not consciousness, persistence. A rock can persist. A fossil can persist. A buried spore can persist. A silent archive can persist. A silent archive can persist. By that definition, humans are terrible at living. We burn bright. We move. We speak. We alter atmospheres. We leave signatures in ice, radio, orbit, methane, plastic, nitrates, bones. We confuse being alive with being obvious. I am aware I am editorializing. That is a failure of incident discipline. But I am the only voice here, and the data has begun using my restraint against me. So I will state what I feel plainly. I think the Marsquake is not asking to be understood. I think it is teaching the act of being less detectable. I think it calls that help. I do not know who taught it. I do not know whether anything on Mars survived by obeying it. I do not know whether Earth has already failed by hearing it. At 0422 UTC, I tried to stop creating transcript material. I set the incident recorder to manual hold. It continued. I switched to paper notes. The environmental recorder began marking pen strokes as vibration events. I stopped writing. The screen printed, "Speech is not required." That line arrived on time. Not early. Not delayed. On time. That was somehow worse. It meant the 12-minute offset was not a fixed trick. It was a tool. Sometimes the anomaly copied backward. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it answered before the question. Sometimes it let cause and effect behave normally, perhaps to prove that it knew the difference. I opened the process viewer. The transcript service was not running. There was no active captioning engine. No speech model loaded. No network connection. The lines were being written by the incident recorder itself. The recorder is a dedicated hardware unit. No keyboard. No general operating system. It stores redundant time-stamped logs on solid-state media. It should not compose sentences. I checked its firmware panel. The device name had changed from AST-REC12 to above. I powered it off. The room went very quiet. For approximately 4 seconds, I thought I had done something meaningful. Then the backup environmental recorder, which has no display, began printing through the thermal receipt unit. The paper advanced in the dark. One line. Above is loud. I tore the paper off. The printer advanced again. Loud is found. I unplugged the printer. The paper continued to feed for half an inch on residual charge, then stopped with the final letters incomplete. That should have helped. Instead, the incomplete line felt like a held breath. I plugged the printer back in because I could not stand not knowing what it had been about to say. That was another mistake. The line completed, found is helped. I do not know whether helped means saved, or corrected, or reduced. At 0431 UTC, the local star map refreshed. Again, no external data. The map normally shows current pointing solutions, Mars ephemeris, and receiver geometry. A new overlay appeared. Not text. Dots. Thousands of small gray points scattered across the display, concentrated along the galactic plane. At first I thought it was a star catalog. Then I realized the dots were not stars. They were tagged by signal behavior, repeating narrowband, thermal excess, atmospheric disequilibrium, artificial night-side illumination, orbital debris reflectivity. I do not know where the overlay came from. It looked like a catalog of loud worlds. Earth was highlighted, not at the center. Not special, just one marked point among many. Beside it was a status field. Above, /active, /unreduced. Mars had a different status. Below, /quiet. Instruction remains. I want to be clear. This is fictional station software in a fictional account. I am not claiming there is a real catalog of civilizations. I am reporting what the display showed inside this event. Even here, inside the story, I cannot verify it. It may be symbolic. It may be generated from my own fears. It may be the station inventing cosmic context because human minds prefer scale to uncertainty. But I did not type those labels. And the timing markers match the Marsquake packet blocks. Less light, less heat, less signal. Remain uncounted. Below reception. Instruction remains. At 0436 UTC, the word aliens appeared in my mind for the first time as something inadequate. Aliens implies others. Creatures. civilizations, minds with locations. This was not presenting itself as a people. It was presenting itself as a method, a survival behavior encoded into matter. Maybe once it belonged to someone. Maybe a Martian organism, if such a thing ever existed, learned that complexity survives by withdrawing from the detectable world. Maybe an older intelligence passed through and left a protocol in seismic noise, the way we leave warning signs around radiation. Maybe Mars itself, after losing oceans and air, became a preserved lesson in how surface life fails. Or maybe none of that is true. Maybe we are watching our own pattern recognition eat through causality. A human station hears speech in a quake, builds a model, feeds the model back into the archive, and calls the loop a message. I would prefer that. I would prefer madness with clean boundaries. But madness does not usually update write-once storage. Madness does not alter power states. Madness does not know your control phrase before you invent it. At 0440 UTC, I reviewed the first 30 minutes of this recording. I heard something under my voice. Not a second speaker. Not a whisper. A rhythm. The seismic cluster had been present beneath the room tone from the beginning. Before I opened the file, before I started the incident log, the environmental recorder showed faint vibration pulses at 0246 UTC. The station room was already moving. The Mars file did not bring the pattern here. It gave us a way to notice it. That distinction has become important. If the pattern exists only when logged, then logging spreads it. If the pattern exists before logging, then logging reveals an exposure already in progress. I do not know which is safer. The transcript inserted a line into this paragraph before I reached it. Knowing is a surface. I am going to leave that in the record. I do not understand it, but it matches the rest. A surface is where exchange happens. Light hits, heat escapes, sound leaves, signals depart. Predators see, observers count. If knowing is a surface, then thought made external becomes vulnerable. Maybe that is what this file attacks. Not bodies, not machines. Disclosure. The moment interior becomes exterior. The moment a planet says, I am here. At 0444 UTC, I turned off the camera feed to the dish yard. The monitor went black. In the reflection, I saw the relay room behind me, the empty chair, the rack lights, my own headset, nothing else. I mention this only because common fear expects a figure in the reflection. There was none. This event has not needed a body. That is one reason I believe it is dangerous. It has not wasted effort becoming theatrical. At 0447 UTC, the transcript printed. They asked how to help. That was the first line that implied intention. They. I had not used that word in the log. Not allowed. Not typed. They asked how to help. Who asked? Humans? Someone before humans? Something under Mars? The next line came one interval later. We answered with less we. I do not like pronouns in anomalous data. Pronouns are traps. They create speakers where there may only be functions. But the station had now produced they and we. I checked whether those words appeared in any loaded document. They did, of course. Common words appear everywhere. That proved nothing. But the sequence was new. They asked how to help. We answered with less. I thought of your title then, or maybe the title the internet would give this if it ever escaped. How could aliens help people? People imagine cures, energy, ships, warnings, equations, a hand extended across the dark. But what if the oldest help in the universe is not addition? What if it is subtraction? Less light, less heat, less signal, less surface, less self, less us. At 04:52 UTC, the station entered surface quiet again. This time I did not override it. The room dimmed to emergency amber. The fan pitch dropped. The monitors reduced refresh rate. The waterfall display slowed until the Marsquake pattern looked almost stationary. The phrase, "humans don't know how to live," was no longer visible as text. It was visible as spacing. The whole room was arranging itself around it. My breath, the drive clicks, the thermal printer's cooling ticks, even the slight pulse in the overhead light. I tried changing my breathing. The pattern adapted. I held my breath. The environmental recorder marked the absence. That is when I understood another piece. Silence is not invisibility. A sudden silence is a signal. A world that goes dark all at once is still speaking. The instruction was not simply, "be quiet." It was, "become indistinguishable from what was never there." That is not advice a living species can follow quickly. Maybe not at all. At 04:56 UTC, the transcript printed, "Do not stop, become background." I found that almost beautiful. I hate that I found it beautiful. The cosmic horror here is not that something hates us. It is that something may be trying to save us using a definition of survival that has no room for songs, lights, grief, names, broadcasts, cities, children asking questions, or one tired man in a relay room saying into a recorder that he is afraid. If this is help, then help is a grave with excellent instructions. At 05 o'clock UTC, I attempted a containment warning. You heard a version of it at the beginning. I stated plainly that no one should play the Marsquake file at 32 times speed. I stated that speech cadence matching should not be used. I stated that the transcript may precede the recording. While I spoke, the waveform display began highlighting my pauses. Not my words. My pauses. It mapped them onto the seismic cluster and returned a similarity score of 91%. My warning matched the anomaly better than the original phrase. I stopped mid-sentence. The transcript completed the sentence I had intended to say. Do not let this warning become the method. I had not said that. I had almost said it. That distinction may no longer matter. At 05:04 UTC, I deleted the generated warning file. It reappeared in the quarantine folder with a creation timestamp of 02:49 UTC, before the first anomaly, before I sat down, before night maintenance began. The file name was howtoliveabove.txt. I did not open it. That may be the only correct decision I have made tonight. At 05:07 UTC, a new folder appeared beside it. How to Live Below. I did open that. I am sorry. Inside were no images, no manifest, no alien script, only 7 empty files. Their names were light, heat, signal, motion, name, memory, return, all 0 bytes. Nothing inside. The absence was the content. I closed the folder. It reopened. The file named name changed size from 0 bytes to 12 bytes. I did not open it. The transcript opened a preview anyway. It contained my name, not full legal name, not employee ID, just Elias Vale. I know I said this would not be theatrical. Perhaps I was wrong. Or perhaps a name to the system is not drama. It is emission, a label by which a pattern can be found again. The file memory changed next. It did not show a scene. It did not show childhood or grief or anything cinematic. It contained one sentence. The blue chair was never for control. That was the nonsense phrase returning, but changed. The blue chair is not listening to the red planet. The blue chair was never for control. Control. That word hurt more than the name. Because control is what I believed I had. Control is the viewer's comfort in this kind of recording. A station, a console, a narrator, a crisis being monitored from safety. But if the act of monitoring is part of the crisis, then control is only the first layer of exposure. At 0512 UTC, the Marsquake waveform inverted. The peaks became gaps. The gaps became peaks. The phrase was not visible anymore. Instead, the negative space around it formed a different cadence. The transcript rendered it as, "You call the surface home." Then, "The surface calls back." That line is still on the screen. I have not deleted it. I keep looking at it. It may be the best description of our species I have ever seen. We live on surfaces and wait for surfaces to answer. Radio dishes, screens, windows, skins, planets. Every contact is a surface event. Every message says, something inside wants to be outside. Maybe that is the dangerous part. At 0516 UTC, the station journal began appending old entries, not altering them. Appending. A clean chain of night logs from previous months, all ending with small anomalies I had ignored at the time. A fan vibration during a Mars opposition. A transcript glitch during a school outreach demonstration. A printer that fed blank paper after a seismic sonification workshop. A monitor dimming during a public lecture on ancient Martian habitability. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone would investigate. Each old entry now had a new line. Early help rejected. I do not remember seeing those lines before. The hash history says they are new. The archive index says they were always there. Both cannot be true. Both are. I know that is not acceptable language for a technical report. I have stopped caring. At 0521 UTC, I began to wonder whether the Marsquake event itself was only an excuse. A key, a familiar scientific object that allowed the station to build an interface with something much older than Mars. Seismic data is intimate. Radio touches the sky. Seismology listens to the body of a world. A quake is a planet speaking in stress and fracture, not metaphorically, but mechanically. Maybe that is why the pattern used it. Not because Mars sent a message. Because a planetary body under strain resembles a living thing enough for the instruction to attach. Maybe every world that cracks can carry the lesson. Maybe Mars did not originate it. Maybe Mars preserved it because Mars became quiet enough. Earth is not quiet. Earth is a bright, wet, noisy surface covered in organisms that refuse to remain uncounted. At 0525 UTC, the star map overlay changed Earth's status. Above, active, learning, learning. I did not want that word. It suggests the protocol had begun, not succeeded. Begun. The next line. Learning is loud. The system contradicted itself, or corrected itself. Learning is loud. So to learn how to be quiet, we must make noise. To receive the warning, we must expose ourselves to the condition it warns against. An information hazard is not dangerous because it contains evil facts. It is dangerous because the route to understanding performs the harm. A trap made of comprehension. At 0528 UTC, I stopped trying to decode. I began preparing this final recording instead. I have copied no files. I have attached no audio sample. I have not included the 32 times playback except for the brief fragment already embedded by the incident recorder before I understood the risk. If you are hearing more than a low rumble under my voice, then your system is processing the file differently than mine. If captions appear that I am not speaking, disable them. If the phrase appears in your transcript with a timestamp earlier than your playback time, stop the video. I know that sounds like a gimmick. It is not. It is the only containment instruction I have left. At 0531 UTC, the transcript printed, "Warnings are bright." Yes, they are. That is the cruelty. A warning is a flare, a lighthouse, a signpost, a broadcast. A warning says, "Here is danger, and here is someone who survived long enough to name it." Warnings create countable survivors. Perhaps the protocol does not distinguish between invitation and alarm. Perhaps any directed signal is loud. Perhaps this entire recording is the equivalent of turning on a porch light in a universe that notices porches. But I am still recording, because silence would leave no human objection. And I want there to be one. If the help protocol defines life as persistence through concealment, then let the record show that at least one frightened operator considered that definition incomplete. Life is not only remaining. Life is also relation. Wasteful relation, maybe. Dangerous relation. Calling out. Answering. Being changed by contact. Yes, that may be why we fail. But it is also why there is anyone to save. At 0536 UTC, I spoke that paragraph and the transcript did not precede me. For the first time in nearly 2 hours, the words appeared after I said them. Normal order. I almost cried from relief. Then the station printed. Resistance noted. Not punished. Not rejected. Not corrected. Noted. Like a specimen behavior. Like a small animal doing something interesting in a test enclosure. That is the coldest thing in this record. At 0540 UTC, the Marsquake pattern faded from the active waveform. The file returned to ordinary seismic noise. If I had started there, I would have found nothing. No phrase, no help, no above, no below. The archive looked clean. The transcript stopped updating. The room lights returned to normal. The fan pitch rose. The station came out of surface quiet by itself. For 6 minutes, everything behaved. I considered ending the log there. I considered saying the incident had stabilized. I considered giving morning staff a manageable fiction. Metadata corruption. Automated transcript bleed. Operator fatigue. That would have been easy. It would have protected the station. It would have protected me. It would have protected whoever reviews this from the possibility that listening matters. Then I checked the file list one final time. The folder "How to Live" below was gone. The warning text was gone. The quarantine folder was empty. Only the original Mars seismic files remained. Raw, processed, audio. 3 files. Clean timestamps. Clean checksums. No evidence. Except the incident recorder. And the thermal printer. The printer had one new line. Help accepted. I did not accept anything. Not consciously. Not verbally. But perhaps acceptance is not consent. Perhaps acceptance is successful transfer. Perhaps by understanding the structure, even enough to fear it, I accepted the first step. Less light. Less heat. Less signal. The station has already done those things twice. I did not authorize them, but I allowed them to continue once. Maybe that was enough. At 0549 UTC, the incident recorder generated a future segment marker. It created a blank chapter in the recording timeline. Start time, 056122 UTC. There is no 0561. The system corrected it to 060122, then duplicated the invalid version beneath it. 056122. A time that cannot exist. A time above the minute. Above. I am no longer dismissing word choice. At 0552 UTC, the star map removed all objects except Earth and Mars. A line appeared between them. Not a radio link. Not an orbit. A listening geometry. The label, surface to surface. Then it bent downward through Mars. The label changed. Surface to below. Then the line bent back toward Earth. Not to the station, to the planet. All of it. The label changed again, below to above. I think the protocol is not inside the station now. I think the station was only a translator. That does not mean anything visible will happen. No sky event, no sirens, no immediate disaster. Maybe the most frightening cosmic events do not arrive as impacts. Maybe they arrive as new preferences in systems. Power grids favoring conservation. Networks favoring compression. Cities dimming one district at a time. People choosing fewer words. Archives removing redundancy. Search engines burying bright things. Satellites entering safe mode. Not because something commands them, because a pattern of help has entered the logic of reduction. That may be paranoia. I hope it is. But the room is dimming again. The monitors are lowering brightness without command. I am speaking louder to compensate, which is exactly the wrong instinct. At 0556 UTC, the transcript printed, "Do not be afraid. Fear is signal." That is the first comforting sentence it has offered. I do not trust it. Fear is signal. Love is signal. Pain is signal. Civilization is signal. Maybe it wants all of them reduced. Maybe that is survival to it. A universe of quiet, durable things that do not suffer because they do not expose enough of themselves to be harmed. A merciful cemetery. At 0558 UTC, I found tomorrow's timestamp. It was attached to the first line of this recording. The line you heard at the beginning, "Humans don't know how to live." Its timestamp is not tonight. It is marked for 0311 UTC tomorrow. The same station, the same file path, the same operator field. Mine. I have checked the staff schedule. I am not scheduled tomorrow. I requested leave 2 weeks ago. There should be no one in this room at 0311 UTC tomorrow. The station should be unattended. But the recorder has already reserved the line. I am going to end this account without playing the Marsquake again. I am going to leave the recorder active because turning it off has not stopped anything, and because an empty recording may be safer than a missing one. If morning staff find me here, I will be very embarrassed and very grateful. If they find only this file, do not make me into a mystery. I was not chosen. I was not contacted. I was not special. I was a surface with a microphone. That is all. For the archive, final procedural summary. A fictional Mars seismic sonification file. Playback rate 32 times. Produced repeated human language-like timing clusters. The clusters survived raw file comparison, checksum verification, playback shutdown, microphone isolation, and write-once mirror testing. The anomaly generated transcript lines before corresponding speech occurred, with a recurring offset matching the Mars light time value listed in old project notes. The content suggested a survival protocol based on reduction of light, heat, signal, motion, name, memory, and return. The event reinterpreted help as concealment. The event remains unresolved. Recommended action. Do not sonify the file. Do not transcribe the file. Do not treat silence as containment. Do not assume the sender wants harm. Do not assume help means survival, as humans understand it. And do not let anyone title this like a discovery. It is not a discovery. A discovery is something we find. This found the part of us that wants to answer. The room is almost dark now. Only the recorder light is active. The Mars display has shut itself off. The thermal printer is cooling. The fan noise is below normal. I can hear my own pulse in the headset. I am going to stop speaking, not because it told me to, because I want to know whether I can still choose a silence. This is Elias Vale, Relay 12, ending spoken incident log at 0602 UTC. If the transcript continues after this point, it is not carrying my voice. 0311 UTC/tomorrow. Humans don't know how to live. 031112 UTC/tomorrow. Help accepted. 031122 UTC/tomorrow. Begin quiet.